So part of what happened in the prayer book were there were services that became a part of our prayer book over as the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church was forming and growing and writing their books and coming up with their liturgies. So some of these were taken from monastic, kind of the rhythm of a day in a monastery. Okay? Now we condensed it in the prayer book, so there aren't quite as many as you would find in a monastery where your first service of the day would be at 3, 4 in the morning. Then another one mid-morning, then another one midday, mid-afternoon. I mean, so not all those are included here, but like morning prayer, noonday prayer, evening prayer. That's what it's pulled from. And what you'll find, so on page 37, you would find daily morning prayer, Rite 1. Rite 1. So you want to know what that means. So you're going to find in the book, you'll find daily morning prayer, Rite 1, and you'll find daily morning prayer, Rite 2. What's the difference?
Rite 1's the old prayer book, and Rite 2's the new one.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily exactly word for word for the old prayer book, but Rite 1, when you see Rite 1, so for example, some of you just came from Holy Eucharist Rite 1. That's more traditional, old school language. Okay, more not exactly but like more kind of King James-ish language. More these and nows and words that most of us in our daily lives don't necessarily speak that way. But Rite 1 has that kind of language. Okay, and Rite 2 is considered the more modern.
Is that what you use in 11?
Like, so this is not most Episcopal churches now that have multiple services. And not every some Episcopal churches have one service on Sunday morning. Kind of depends on the context and how many people. Some have one. The church I moved here from, we had 3 in the morning, three services on Sunday morning, and we had 3 services on Sunday evening. Now, each of those services on Sunday evening were targeted. Like, I did a college service. There was a kind of Celtic, kind of contemplative service, and we had a Spanish service because there was a significant Spanish population. So, but yeah, there were 6 services on a Sunday.
Wow. At
that church. But a lot of churches, I would say the majority of them, have 2. And there's an early service, 8:30 kind of time frame. That's usually Rite 1. That's usually the more traditional language. The later service, Rite 2. Okay? But what my point is, so there's Rite 1 and Rite 2 Eucharist. There's Rite 1 and Rite 2 morning prayer. Rite 1 and Rite 2 evening prayer. And again, there's noonday prayer as well. Okay, y'all, there are even shorter versions of those things where in the prayer book, devotions for individuals and families is something else you would find. Okay, but morning prayer you can say on your own. So it's actually written so you can say if you miss it. I think what you're saying is I miss it communally, but many people, they say morning prayer. It's part of their daily devotional routine. As they get up, they say morning prayer. Okay, there's an evening prayer. Another service, and so we're going to do this when we do our Wednesdays. We're going to do 5:30 to 6 supper, 6 to 6:45 program presentation, 6:45 to 7. We're going to do something called Compline. Compline, again, this is taken from the monastic kind of day. This was the end of the day service. This was the service right before you retire. You go to bed. Okay? It's beautiful. Okay? It's not incredibly light. It's just a really nice, wonderful way to end the day. So we're going to end our evening with Compline, right? It's because part of what I want to do is introduce people to parts of the prayer book and think that you may not be aware of that are in there. We're going to talk about a couple of those in a few minutes.
Compline is a nice prayer, nice service to be able to do, even if you have just a group. But we have like a Curcio reunion group. We use Compline. I used to use it as a cancer support group when I ran one of those, and it's just a nice little service.
Wonderful service. Great with a small group. Yes, absolutely.
Back when I was in EYC a million years ago, we always ended each one of our EYC
With Compline.
Yeah.
Great service. Really, really nice service. Okay. So here's the other thing about morning prayer, and there's a whole set. I brought the book last week, and we talked a little bit about the lectionary. So there's a three-year rotation of readings for Sunday. Okay. So we're currently the second year, which is it's year A, B, and C. We're on year B right now. Okay. And you cover a lot of scripture. Okay. You don't cover the entire Bible, but you cover a lot. Morning prayer and evening prayer, you cover even more in depth. And that's a 2-year cycle of readings. Okay. But some of you, when we did the reading all the way through from beginning to end of the Bible for Lent a few years ago. Some of you may remember that fondly or not so fondly, depending on what you read, because some of you you would pick up reading where the previous person left off. You didn't just pick and choose like your favorite. So you may have gone in and Judges, and you go, whoa, that's something. That involves a lot of blood and death and yes, there are those places in the book. You get a lot more if you read morning prayer, evening prayer. You're going to get that. So when I was in seminary and it's called the rota, the rotation. And one of the beautiful things about Swanee that I really appreciate was as a student, I got a lot of practice in chapel. Now, at the time, I wasn't that excited about it, but looking back, a lot of practice, whether it was just reading or preaching. And so we would get the rota would come out, the calendar, and you immediately find your days. And then you go into the lecture like, oh my gosh. Because there were the days where you might have like, what am I going to say about that awful battle between so if you want an experience of more in-depth scripture reading combined with a beautiful liturgy for prayer, personal prayer, morning prayer, evening prayer, okay, and in the Book of Common Prayer you've got the lectionaries are included, so it tells you all the readings and all that stuff, so you can look it up. Okay? Y'all stop me if you have questions. Are there any questions at this point?
You just said the Book of Common Prayer, the lectionary is included.
Yes, in the back.
In the back. Okay. All right. So yeah, I've
Yeah.
looked at that. Okay.
Near the back. So
9:36.
Yes.
yeah,
30.
9:33. You get explanations too of everything, and then beginning on 9:36, you get the daily office lectionary, and it's like I said, it's a 2-year cycle for that. Okay, so communal worship is emphasized, and again, even though I'm saying some of these things you can do as an individual, that's perfectly okay. We do emphasize communal worship, right? Communal worship and also sacramental worship. Okay, so last week we kind of just barely started, I think, talking about the sacramental aspect of the church, right? So where the Episcopal Church and remember, we also talked about this last week. We're considered, the term I used was via media, middle way. So navigating in the middle between Roman Catholic and Protestant. Okay? Some churches lean a little more Roman Catholic, some lean a little more Protestant. We're probably best described at St. George's as broad church. Okay? Broad church, depending on where you've worshiped before, you may go, no, you're way more Protestant. Or some people, if we use incense, or they go, what's with the Catholic stuff? Okay? So it depends on your own experience in your past as to where you might see us. But I would say it would be safe to say we're more broad church than anything else, right? Okay. So like the Protestant end of the spectrum, we do emphasize 2 sacraments, right? Like other Protestant churches, the 2 that Jesus himself either participated in or initiated, right? So first would be,
Baptism.
okay? So we're just going to kind of, as we go through these, and this will help get us more familiar with the book, which we don't use as much these days in church because everything is printed. Though last year for Lent, we did go with a scaled back bulletin and used the books a little bit more. So,
$2.99.
What's $2.99?
There's so many interesting other things we wouldn't find there.
okay, so let me point this out. And I apologize if people watching this are just going to be like, what is happening? He is all over the place, so I apologize for that. But you're going to notice there's this section before Holy Baptism, the section just preceding it is actually going to have days. So the section is called Proper Liturgies for Special Days. Right? We're about to hit this time of year. So it's worth us looking at. So 264, Ash Wednesday. Okay, so Ash Wednesday begins, what do we call that period? Lent, right? Okay, and then we're going to go through a period of time in Lent, and then we're going to get to Holy Week. Right, and what begins Holy Week? Okay, so 270. Palm Sunday. Okay, there will be other significant services during that week. So after Palm Sunday, Maundy, Thursday. Now some churches do have services on Wednesday, but Thursday, Friday, Saturday for us in Holy are considered especially significant. This is called the Triduum, Triduum. Okay, these 3 days, the end of the week, Maundy, Thursday. Okay, then you have Good Friday.
Got time for a class picture.
You have Holy Saturday.
On the books up, right?
Everybody smile. That's right. Look at us. Okay, Jim. Holy Saturday. Okay, 285. Okay. Who's heard of this before?
The vigil.
The Great Vigil of Easter.
The only reason I'd heard it as a cradle Episcopalian was when my wife was baptized on Easter Sunday, and the baptism was during the Easter vigil, and so we got up at pre-dawn and was at the church, and
Okay.
it was pretty amazing.
Okay.
I've stood vigil a couple of times.
That's different.
It's different.
Yeah, you're talking about something else. You're talking about with the reserve sacrament?
Yes.
Yeah, this is different. So
I had never heard about this until last year either.
so here's what's
Great
interesting.
Virtual Vision?
Huh?
The Great Virtual Vision?
Yeah.
Now what
Yeah.
We've been going to the same
but
church.
but see here this is what it's look,
You
can
brought
I
it up last year and I didn't know what you're talking
can I
about.
use you as an example?
Yeah.
And I don't mean this in a bad
No,
way.
it's fine, yeah.
But you're a lifelong Episcopalian.
Yeah.
You know, there are things in the book, in the prayer book. And again, this is contextual. Okay, so I'll be honest with you. I'd never heard of the Great Vigil of Easter until I went to seminary. And it was a very big deal. And then I learned that in the early church, the service for Easter, the most important service for Easter was this one, not Easter Sunday. You know, that developed later. Okay? Now, contextually, we're in a part of the world where, guess what? Easter Sunday, it's a pretty big deal, right? And that's when most Christian churches celebrate Easter. But what I'm telling you is in the early church, so this is another thing that we do. This isn't criticism or a jab at other denominations, but studying history, studying early liturgical practices, incorporating those things is significant to us, right? So this is where like scholarship and tradition become very important. But what would happen was people prepared for prepared for baptism, so they wanted to join the church. In some cases, if you had really messed up, you may have been told you need to like take a hike for a little while, and then you need to do some things to repair and fix what you've done. Then we're going to bring you back into the church. The Easter Vigil was a service where people who were entering the church for the first time or had maybe done something were coming back into the church. This is when it happened. And so is an Easter service, but also a baptismal service. So at Swanee, again, this was a big deal, and there were a number of baptisms, and that was considered the primary Easter service. So technically, you'd go to Easter Vigil, and that was your Easter. And it starts at sundown on Saturday evening. And the service is usually, I'd say, 2 to 3 hours. Lots of readings, taking you through the whole story of basically Christ redeeming the world. And so there's those things, and their baptism, and Eucharist, first Eucharist at Easter, and all these things. You light a fire outside, and then you go into the church. Everyone has a candle from that fire. It's a whole thing. So more and more Episcopal churches have started doing an Easter Vigil. It's in the book, but I pointed it out because I wanted you to notice how it bumps up against baptism. So you see how historic, that's when you were baptized, right? So that's the placement. So the placement of things in the book, there's sometimes it seems, when you're using this book at a service, we have everything printed. When you're sometimes flipping and round, and that's part of what's confusing, but it's done that way actually for a reason. So the things are placed in this book for a reason. Okay.
The All Saints bulletin for that service was 8.5 by 11 book. I mean, and we still have it. If you're interested, I can maybe bring it in. And it was a beautiful service.
So there are days specifically set aside for baptism in the Episcopal Church. Okay, it's encouraged that you would do a baptism on at Easter, at All Saints. We had one on the day of the readings were about Jesus' baptism. So that's another day, right? It makes sense, right? But we can do baptism any Sunday. We can do baptism, quite frankly, anytime, anywhere. And technically, you could do a baptism in an emergency situation. Okay? Right? So that can happen. But in terms of communal, we would tend to encourage. In fact, we can do private baptisms. Okay? I would want to encourage a family that would come to me about a baptism and say, let's do this in the context of a church service. Why is that, you think? Why would I, as a priest, kind of emphasize that?
Because we're all very,
Receiving them in the
They
family.
know that there was a whole group of people supporting them.
Yeah.
part of the baptismal.
We emphasize this, so y'all, you see, this is an example where we emphasize the communal part of it, and we're also emphasizing at a baptism our own, because part of what we'll do is we'll renew our baptismal vows, right? To kind of, say this out loud one more time in the context of community while this baptism's happening. There's another reason too that the community part is important, and it has to do with when we do baptism. Can anyone think about what I might be getting at there? When do we say it's okay for this person to be baptized? When do we say that it's okay? Am I not making sense? Does my question not make? I'm getting looks like your question doesn't make sense.
I mean, I know
Is there an age requirement?
No.
Yeah.
So we practice infant baptism.
Yes.
Okay. Now, someone who would go, why would you do that? How could you do that? Has anyone ever questioned any of you on, like, hey, you're Episcopalian, like, what's up with the infant baptism stuff? Why do we do that? Now I'm asking you, why do we do that?
No
Because
idea.
it's in the Nicene Creed, and we believe in one baptism, forgiveness of sins. Go ahead and catch them early.
Doesn't see it, doesn't see it. Gets early.
We believe in welcoming everybody.
It in tradition that you have to, that until you baptize somebody, they're going to hell.
They're going to Rite.
And once you baptize them, then they're
okay.
You're saying-
well, no, but at least they're on the right track. But if it's sort of like if you have a baby born dead, some people insist on having a priest come and baptize them immediately.
So
Well,
I'm just
they're
going
going
to
to
tell
die.
you and anyone who's watching, I in no way, if a family comes and say we want to have our child baptized, I'm just going to tell you that this priest would never say, well, yeah, we better get this on the calendar so that if something happens to your kid, that he or she doesn't go.
Well, I know you wouldn't say it. I'm just saying.
No, my point, Lee, I'm not trying to be flip about it. I'm trying to say that's not as much as an emphasis for, I'm not saying that there aren't Episcopals who believe that, but I mean, you're getting into territory of beliefs of heaven and hell and that are super complicated and complex. Okay? The point is, God's love for us isn't dependent on like an age requirement or even a sense of understanding. And so we do this baptism in front of people because we're saying, and there are parents there, they're godparents who basically are saying, we're going to help bring this child up in the Christian way of life. But the other big thing is like, there are all these people there. It's all of us saying, we're a part of this community and we're going to help raise this person up. Right? So, again, I grew up in a tradition. I mean, there was infant baptism, but there are plenty of traditions where it's not. It's you profess like, I believe this, and then it happens. Whereas we like the Catholic Church, like the Orthodox Church, we baptize infants. And a part of it traditionally has been, yes, it's kind of a safeguard, for lack of a better word, in case something would happen. But my point, we tend to emphasize the other reasons for doing it, right? Being reborn into Christ and what Christ represented, right? So, holy baptism. Any other questions about that? What's always necessary or required at a baptism, and it doesn't matter denomination. There are two things that have to be part of a baptism. Water. One other one.
Laying on the hands? No.
This has to do with words that are said or something being invoked or referred to.
Baptize in the name of
Baptize you
name of God the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
There you go. Water and Trinity. Okay? Questions?
You know, we had a physician here a long time ago. He was a good friend of mine. He was an OBGYN. And he used to be in a hunting club. We sit around night campfire talking. And he told me, he said, I baptize every baby at birth. The parents may don't know that this kid is going to be baptized when he
Wow.
gets here. That always struck me as kind of, I didn't know, I thought, God, what if the parents find out, you know? That's just something he did on his own. And it goes back to what you were saying, I think. Just make sure his kid, you know, has a chance.
Yeah.
I have a little niece and nephew that need an exorcism instead of a baptism.
So as a critical care nurse with children undergoing open heart surgery, over the years, I've done this for 50 years ago, their survival rate was less than 1%. And there were many a baby that we would just, whoever happened to be there, we baptized them. We felt it couldn't do any harm and gave them a little bit of something.
That's kind of what this guy did.
Yeah.
So, y'all, if you, just along those lines, just if you turn to page 313. And you will see, some things in the book and some things we do, they're specific, we call them rubrics, direction given, and other things. It's not specifically so, for example, like especially personal things like when people cross themselves or maybe genuflect or kneel, or those aren't necessarily prescribed. It's like you have to do this here. It's almost kind of a personal type thing. And even if like things that I do at the altar, that has something to do with where I studied and who I trained with. And so the funny is a lot of my friends that when we Episcopal priests are like awful visiting other churches. Well, I'll say I am. I'll speak for myself. Like, because you just sit there and like watch someone go, didn't go to Swanee. or just like, I bet, yeah, VTS is where that, yeah. So when I went to St. Peter's in Oxford, I was the only Swanee guy on the staff. Everyone else was at VTS or something, and they were like, "You're so Swanee." The way you do this. Okay, but you see here on 313 conditional baptism and emergency baptism.
I have grandchildren whose parents, one of them being my son, are Buddhists, and they refuse to have those children baptized. And the other mother-in-law and I are both Episcopalian, and it drove us crazy, but I thought there was nothing really. We didn't want a big rift in the family right off.
Yeah.
But I think those children actually are being taught a more spiritual life.
Yeah.
Living in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
Than they would normally.
Yeah.
That's what I meant about my brothers, the same way.
Yes.
And people not bring in the church at all into it, no baptisms at all. But they're not Buddhist, but they have this more of a spirituality. They live in California, so.
Oh, gee, that explains the whole problem.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, you raise is it okay? You've gone through this ritual, so all good,
Yeah.
or is it or would we say, yeah, like we think the ritual's important, right? We think this liturgy is important, but it's also like the life of that, and again, support in doing that and living that way. But yeah, we could go down that road of people who are just wonderful people and never set foot in a church, and people who do all the time, and you know. Okay, so I think I mentioned last week that our theology overall would be considered a baptismal theology, meaning baptism is kind of your ticket, for lack of a better word, into other sacraments and other sacramental rites. Okay? This gets a little complicated too, though. Okay? Because next we have Holy Eucharist. Right? So if you're following along in the book, you have baptism, Eucharist. Right? So we say those are the two most significant sacraments, and then we have what are called technically sacramental rites. Okay? We don't necessarily put them on the level of baptism and Eucharist, but they're still sacramental. Does that make sense? Okay. And these are things which we won't have time to get into today. We'll just put it to next week. But these are things that other Protestant denominations would certainly not consider sacraments. So most other Protestant denominations, it's baptism, and a lot of them don't call it Eucharist. What are some other names for
Holy Communion.
Holy Communion's one? Can you think of any other ones?
The Lord's Supper.
Lord's Supper, good one. Anything else? There's another one you've heard. Mass.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. That's Catholic, isn't it?
That's Catholic, and that actually comes from, that word is derived from the Latin word for a particular point in the service on Sunday, where they would say, okay, either you've been baptized and will now have communion, or you are dismissed. So Mass comes from the Latin word for dismissal, basically. Okay.
But it's okay if you call it a Mass. I mean, I've heard,
So some people refer to the whole service as Mass.
Yeah,
no,
yes,
what I'm
but a
saying- what I'm
Eucharistic
saying is
service.
I've heard Episcopalians. I've done it myself.
Oh, going to
Oh,
Mass.
Mass.
Yeah. Now, again, that's a little more Anglo-Catholic. You're going to have fewer people, Episcopal, but I'm saying you're going to have fewer people at St. George's in Griffin refer to it as Mass than they are going to probably refer to it as communion or Eucharist. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing, for sure.
Well, let me ask you. You're talking about baptism being the lead into everything else.
Yeah.
And this is one argument that you always have.
Yeah.
Should you allow unbaptized people to take communion?
I was waiting for this, actually.
Particularly,
You get 30
particularly
seconds.
I was waiting.
children.
I'll take a minute or two for this. This may have to move into next week.
Well, particular children. These are those obvious, but if they were not raised Episcopalian and didn't have infant baptism, should they be allowed to take communion before they've been baptized?
Okay. Have you paid attention to what I say before Eucharist? Have you paid attention to what's in the bulletin about who can come up?
All baptized.
It says all baptized.
No, it doesn't.
This is all are welcome.
It doesn't say it.
All are welcome. All are welcome.
See? So this is obviously impacted by the traditions I came from, and it also was impacted by my job as a school chaplain. Where, and I will never forget being in a class in seminary, and I was gonna be a school chaplain. That was gonna be my job, and we're talking about Eucharist and being baptized, and the professor was adamant. And I raised my hand. I said, so I'm in a school situation. And I was going to a K through 8 school. when we do Eucharist, we have to tell the who are not baptized, even if their parents are okay with it, like, you need to wait here. Or I said, that's what I'm supposed to do. And he said emphatically, yes, or don't do Eucharist. I didn't follow that advice. So y'all, just so you know, I do something called open table. I don't say you only have to be baptized. Number one, I'm not going to check anyone's ID on the way up.
Right.
Not to be flip.
Which wouldn't even say.
But the other thing has to do with the fact I work for a bishop who's okay with open table. Now, if my bishop said you can't do that, heck, I wouldn't be doing it. Or I wouldn't be working here in this diocese. But our bishop allows for it. Okay? So there are different interpretations of this, Lee. Some people say, yes, you must 100% be baptized before you can take communion. I leave it vague. I don't say, and it's not in the bulletin. If y'all thought that was in the bulletin, my predecessor had it in the bulletin. It hasn't been in the bulletin for 3 years. And you're just now picking up on it.
Years ago, you had to be confirmed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Correct. Hey, y'all, if some of my professors, they'd be like, dude. I approach it as, and this is, I don't believe Jesus would say to anybody, like, no. And if you're baptized, what is your understanding of your baptismal covenant and your understanding of what's happening at the table? I don't know. Maybe it's very sophisticated and right, but I'm at the altar every Sunday, and there are times I'm standing there going, I don't fully understand this. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. And that's part of what we believe. So all this is to say, there's something called open table. Some priests subscribe to that. Some don't. And that's where we are. And so that's how I approach it. Did I answer your question?
Well,
And
yeah,
I
it's-
do have literally 1 minute.
it's very simple. It's very simple to my belief. My belief is that it's not who gives communion. It's not how they give, who they give. It's not who you take it. It's how the grace that's imparted to the person. And if you take it unworthily, that's your problem.
Yeah. I mean,
Or if you
again,
not baptized,
I
you
want to
take
be
it, that's your
perfectly transparent. I have very close friends who disagree with me on this, and I have other who agree with me. But the people most influential in my life, who were priests, who I admired and looked up to, that's who I learned from. And so again, I can't turn someone away. And I certainly, when I was going into a school, wasn't prepared to go, well, we're just not going to do Eucharist. Or like, again, you kids stay over there. Like, I couldn't do it. I could not do it.
Thank you for being open and welcoming.
Well,
Well, I want to thank you for that too. Today I came, didn't know what to do, don't know the liturgy, I know the Lord's Prayer.
And we
But let me tell you what, I read the thing
turn
in
left.
the pew. It said, "Don't worry about it. You don't know what to do." So I didn't worry.
Yeah.
And then I read on the back, "Oh, welcome to communion." I didn't know if I would be allowed. I wasn't going to do it because I would not disrespect any denomination. But it said, "Oh, really?" I've been taking it home. I mean, I wasn't an atheist yesterday. I have been, trying to find my way back. But to have been able to share that with y'all today,
oh,
the blessing.
I'm glad you were in front of us.
Me too.
thank
You've got to go.
you for being here
Thank you
and for sharing that.
Thank you
Come
for
back.
And thanks
Welcome
to everybody.
Yeah.
So at the Last Supper, when the Eucharist was instituted by Jesus, how many of the apostles, had they all been baptized prior to that?
Good question.
Sure, you think.
You would think.
so.
Yeah, yeah.
You would think.
Probably.
I mean, I think that would be the assumption.
But if
But
somebody knocked
they
on
weren't-
the
they
door,
weren't
all-
you'd be welcome.
They weren't all John the Baptist apostles, and so they hadn't been baptized, theoretically.
Y'all are awesome. What a great.
Well,
And on that
that's
note,
all.
I'm going to not answer, and I'm going to use the excuse of I have